Fnatic's recent uptick in form over their last few events is one of the biggest surprises of 2019. It legitimately came out of nowhere like an RKO from Randy Orton himself in the form of JW, running back 5 years, bringing out this incredible form, and really everyone on this team seems to be doing exactly what they need to be. They're getting enough firepower out of their main players, they're getting good leadership out of Golden again, and they are really taking the scene by storm, and I never would have expected, I don't think anybody could have. I mean, when you think about Fnatic's trajectory from like 2018 forward, the success is super limited. I mean, obviously when they had Golden previously, they had, the I Am Katowice win in 2018, as well as the WSG victory. They had a couple other finishes here and there that were pretty good. And then they made the surprising decision to kind of shift Golden into an entry fragger role and bring Exist as an in-game leader. And then Golden does the whole I fucking stay thing, but then he winds up leaving anyway. And there is just so much craziness that kind of happens during this time period. But, they make their decision. They bring Exist on board. And they really don't do that well, right? I mean, they kind of had those events with Draken on the team first, where they, bombed the Face It Major, bombed DreamHack Masters Stockholm, didn't really do a whole lot. And then obviously they brought Twist on board, they got Brolin on board, and they had some good initial tournaments. Like they did really well at IEM Chicago. They placed top 4. They had the PLG, Grand Slam that they won. They did okay at iBuyPower Masters, but then from that point forward, success was limited. Again, they didn't really do well at the IEM Katowice Major. They had a couple of good events at Sydney and Slaughter Season 7, but then they went on this run kind of at the end of the Slaughter's tenure where they bombed DreamHack Masters Dallas, they bombed the EPL Season 9 finals, they bombed Cologne, and they didn't even make the most recent major. They placed 4th at the European Minor, falling out of contention to even play in like the last chance qualifier or what have you for the major. So this was a real rough run from Fnatic all the way through. And then they make the decision, after having that really poor run, to go ahead and bring back Golden and bring back Flusha. Now, obviously, this is a lot of the components that were on that team that was doing some cool stuff kind of, late 2017 through mid-2018 before they eventually decided to remove Golden in favor of Exist as the in-game leader. But this is a bit different because obviously Brolin wasn't a part of that team. And he is definitely this young upcoming talent in Sweden who, didn't bloom quite as fast as like a Rops or some of these other young guys, but now he's really hitting his stride. And so this is definitely a key difference to have a player like this on your team. Like this kind of, new lifeblood that is really hungry and who's performing really well and who still has a lot of room to develop. And obviously Crims has maintained good form, so that's good. But there's been some crazy things that you couldn't really expect. And we'll start with the results that you couldn't have expected because their debut event was Malmo. And they ran the gauntlet. They beat Astralis. They beat Vitality, who was looking hot at the time. They beat Furia, who was pretty decent. I mean, they really tore through it. They even had some super lopsided victories over, some of these teams, like lopsided victory over Astralis on Overpass. They completely lights out G2. It was an incredible run. Just on home soil, debut event with Golden back on the team, Flusha back on the team, and somehow everything just works immediately, and they have this huge title. Right. Then you had like the EPL group stages, which they only lost to Astralis, so they got to go into the second group stage. Now, obviously, the second group stage was a bit weird because I think Crims was ill, so they had to use like Kriaz. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, actually. And so it's a little bit hard to read too much to their EPL performance, but they did well enough to make the finals, which they're going to play in a little bit later. So I guess, that's all that really matters in that regard. But then they also had this second place finish at Starlighter Season 8. And this is where, they beat Mousesports, they beat Made in Brazil, they beat Vitality again, they beat Furia, they ultimately lost out to 2 different best of 3s to Evil Geniuses, which was a team that was on a tear, right? Because they had won ESL 1 New York. They obviously do really well at this tournament. So this was still a really big finish for Fnatic, though, like only getting bested by Evil Geniuses, a team that at this point was looking like they were really going to contend for a number 1 spot. I think they were even briefly ranked number 1 after their success at this tournament and off the back of New York as well. And then we just saw at the ECS Season 8 finals, and while they did lose to Team Liquid, they still wind up getting, a top 4 finish when it was all said and done. They had a series victory over Made in Brazil. The only other loss was to Astralis. So basically they lost to number 1, number 2 teams in the world. They firmly have established themselves as kind of like number 4, I guess you could say, because it's like Astralis, Liquid, Evil Geniuses, then Fnatic, and then 100 Thieves is kind of how it sits right now, at least as I make this video. That obviously will change depending on if you watch this like 20 years in the future or some shit, but that's where we're at right now in this video. So these are some pretty nuts results. Again, it really just came out of nowhere, and it's because I don't think we expected them to click this well as far as their strategy and their map pool, and their individual player form has also been pretty nuts. And so we'll kind of start with their map pool because they actually have one. Their Inferno is a bit kind of up and down, but they can play it. They have a positive win rate on it. They've been able to get some good ones at times. For example, they've gotten victories over Made in Brazil a couple of times. They've beaten Vitality. They've beaten Mouse Sports. So they've been able to get some wins on it. They do have losses, but their losses are to really good teams like Liquid, like Astralis, like Evil Geniuses. So definitely a map that they can certainly put in good performances. You look at their Mirage. This is, again, another map that they have a positive win rate on. They have even a win over Evil Geniuses. They have beaten some other solid teams as well along the way. Their losses are to Liquid, Evil Geniuses, and what is now 100 Thieves. So, again, usually able to beat, other top 10 teams. And have beaten some of the top 5 teams as well. Their Dust 2 isn't there, so that is definitely one weakness in their map pool that you definitely could point to. They haven't really played any Vertigo either, so not really sure about that. They've only played one match, which is victory over Made in Brazil. So Dust 2 and Vertigo could be weak points in their map pool. But again, they can play Inferno, they can play Mirage, which is important because those are basically maps that everyone plays. They have shown the capability of playing Nuke already as well. They have some wins over Furia and Vitality, and even a win over Astralis in like a triple overtime game at Malmö. Their only losses are to Astralis and then their first ever Nuke game at Malmö, which is against NIP. So it seems like their Nuke is actually going to be up to snuff. And then, yeah, they have Overpass and Train, which I think is really important because when you think about the Astralis matchup, Astralis have had their issues with Overpass. Liquid seems to not even want to play Overpass anymore, and so the fact that they actually have a strong Overpass is really important. They've only lost it once. It was to Aristocracy, funnily enough, so that's kind of a crazy one to lose, though. That was a situation where I don't really read too much into it. It's just kind of a one-time thing. But they've gotten wins over Liquid, Astralis, Furia, NIP, G2. So that map's looking really good. And then they're also capable of playing Train, which isn't the most popular map, right? Like, not that many teams are specialists on it. Their only loss was a 14-16 loss to Astralis. They beat Mouse Sports, they beat G2. And some of their other wins are against weaker teams, to be fair. But they have a decent enough map pool is the point. And the fact that they are able to play Overpass really well is definitely really, really important. Then talk about their individual player form. Brolin has been a lights-out player, particularly since we saw Golden come back on the team for Malmö. Since he's been back, the dude's dropped ridiculous numbers at Malmö, EPL group stages, and Starlighter Season 8. To be fair, he wasn't as impactful at the ECS Season 8. That was mostly due to some really bad maps to Liquid and Astralis. He played fine against Made in Brazil. He did have one good map against Team Liquid at least. So all in all, though, he's performed really well all through these events since Golden came on board. He was already playing pretty decently, but I feel like he's hit like a whole new level when you look at Starlighter Season 8. In particular, it's probably the biggest performance of his entire career thus far. He had some other events where he had played well for Fnatic, back when let's say they, won that PLG event, for example. He had a pretty big performance there, had a pretty big performance as well at I Am Chicago. But again, this stretch of events is where I really feel like he's starting to hit kind of a whole new level. And that's really important for Fnatic because he's one of their big playmakers. He's a guy that can be a part of the main entry hit squad, first or second in or maybe third in, definitely a really big trade fragger, really can be assertive on the map. At times he plays peripheral roles, but usually he's going to be in the mix. And they definitely try to facilitate him, I think, and create space for him. And he's taken the reins and he's doing a really great job as kind of being the star of this team. So it's really great to see that. Krims also has been able to get back in good shape. I mean, he was looking monstrous, kind of earlier in the year at like Sydney and Starlight Season 7 and things like that. He also had some really good periods in 2018 where he looked like an absolute monster, like back in the form that he was when he was considered the best player in the world. If you wind back the clock, like kind of more into the 2015 time period, 2014 time period. But then he did have this stretch of events where he was looking really, really rough, and that were actually the events that the team was bombing back before they made the change. So Dallas, EPL Season 9, Cologne, the European minor for the Starlighter Berlin Major, those events, he really fell off a cliff in comparison to the player that he was, kind of in the first quarter of 2019 and into a couple of years past. But now he had a great performance at Malmö. He did well in the EPL groups. He did pretty well here at ECS Season 8. So it seems like he is getting back into really good shape. He hasn't had as many consistent monster performances in a row as he did, kind of earlier in the year, but he definitely has seen a positive uptick, and I think his most recent performances are definitely a sign that, maybe Brolin's going to be the star of this team, but Krims can be like the number 2 or number 3 man on the team, and that's fair enough. That's all you really need if Brolin continues to develop. So that's great. Now, the most shocking thing of all is JW. I mean, I think Thorn put it best. I can't remember what video it was that was on his YouTube channel, but he basically said something like JW went into a time machine 5 years ago, came back out and started playing CS again, but in 2019 or something to that effect. And that basically is what's happened. like the dude looks unreal. I mean, it even kind of started at the European minor before they made the change. He had actually had like a pretty good little run there. But other than that, most of the events he didn't do well, except for like maybe Sydney this year. Every other event was just kind of like, good, but not terrible. He did have his issues in 2018. So to see this guy step up and put plus 60 at Malmö, put plus 35 to the EPL group stages, and have a really good ECS tournament is pretty crazy. I mean, he's back into a primary opping role, even though he does on some maps just still kind of play solo roles because they run a lot of 5 rifle setups. So he's kind of flexible in that regard, but he gets to do the opping when there is opping to be done, which apparently is really helping him thrive. And yeah, dude, he like the eye test when you watch him play, the shit he gets away with, the crazy stuff that he can do. He's like that X Factor guy. If Crims and Brolin are stable, he's the one that can like really have the freedom to do like this nut stuff and get away with it. And he's always been really good at kind of these wacky plays or these unorthodox maneuvers, and so he gets to do a lot of that when he's in 5 rifle setups, and then he can still be a pretty strong opper. So his resurgence, I think, has been one of the biggest things that's helped this team out. Brolin's development is certainly big. Crims maintaining steady through everything is obviously big as well. But I think that JW's resurgence is probably one of the biggest factors in why this team's actually been able to do a whole lot. And then at Flusha, he's done well. It's not like he's putting up crazy numbers or anything like that. But I mean, when you compare to when he left Fnatic, the last 6 or 7 tournaments he played with Fnatic in 2018 before he was removed from the team in his early days on Cloud9, he's been able to come back and stride. And this was obviously after taking a pretty substantial break, right? Because his last game with Cloud9 was February of 2019. And then he was basically off for 8 months before he returns to play with Fnatic with the Malmö event. So that's actually kind of crazy to think that he took that much time off and he came back and he's actually been playing pretty well. He played really well at Slaughter Season 8, by the way. At ECS, yeah, he was a little bit up and down, but really everyone kind of was at this event because of the games against Liquid and Astralis. But all in all, at Malmö, he also had his matches where he played really well. And again, he doesn't have to be the star of this team. He could be like the 3rd or 4th best player as long as JW, Crims, and Brolin are lighting it up. So he's actually like kind of in a perfect position. He's gotten back pretty much all his old roles from when he played with Fnatic in the past. So he's playing, outside A on Mirage or playing outside B on Overpass or, doing kind of these more traditional like lurk type roles. He can definitely break out and be aggressive on the edge of the map. He can sometimes even go in first if it makes sense to, like if you're doing a B hit on Overpass or something. But yeah, he gets to kind of play what he's comfortable with, what he's used to, and he can kind of just be, a decent player. He doesn't have to, again, be a superstar or be anything crazy. He just needs to be stable, and he's definitely been able to do that. Now, I'm not going to talk about Gold individually because obviously we know that he's not usually going to be a big breadwinner when it comes to fragging, but what I can do is kind of talk about how this team is looking tactically so far. So when you look at a map like Inferno, which is one of the maps that they are playing a lot next to Mirage, it's their most played maps between those two maps, they were able to get Flusha back into playing banana control on the T side, which is something he used to do in the past. Golden is playing with him over there, again, something he used to do when he played on Fnatic in the past. They've gotten Brolin back in the apartments, which is his original spot when he came over from Red Reserve, but he kind of went over to be temporarily when Flusha was gone. Well, not temporarily, it was actually many months that he's been doing that, but now he's back to kind of playing apartments or boiler or maybe helping with some of the entry work at mid or some of the routes they do at Arch and stuff like that. Crims is still playing kind of, in apartments or boiler or helping with mid. And then JW is the opera, but obviously on T side, they're not doing a whole lot of opping. And so he can kind of be that guy that kind of helps play up B, which is something he was kind of doing in the past anyway. So, he kind of gets back into a comfy role because I think for a time there, because Brolin had to go over to Banana to cover for Flusha, you actually sometimes saw JW playing apartments, which is kind of odd. So now everyone's kind of just getting back into roles that they're more comfy with, that they're more traditionally known for. And I think that's really done a lot to get players more comfortable and get them performing better and just looking like more organized, so to speak. They definitely are playing the map very typically, can do the map control style, can throw in the fast-paced hits. They have the nades they need to do executes, and so they're definitely looking pretty sharp on that. Same with their CT side on Inferno. They've been able to get basically everyone back into their old spots where they're comfortable, and so that's great stuff. Now, Mirage, things are kind of interesting because while JW is their primary opera, they actually run a lot of 5 rifle setups. So JW is actually still playing a lot of B apartments like he was doing in the past when Twist was the opera on the team. They have Flusha playing back outside A again like he did most of his time on Fnatic throughout the years. And then they have Golden, Brolin, and Krems basically doing the things that they were doing in the past. I mean, Krems was playing outside A ever since Flush's departure, and he was actually quite good at it, but he's still comfortable playing in mid, something he did traditionally with Fnatic over the years. You get Brolin into mid and get him into a trade fragger position on executes. They don't do mid control all the time. They actually really favor like 1-4 A setups, it seems like, where, you know, JW or Golden will solo out mid and the rest are just kind of splitting Palace and ramp. They're very fast paced, but they're effective. They use their utility well. Their spacing's good. They're trade fragging. They're creating that space for Brolin to be the star and those types of entry trade fragger roles. And they're doing fine on Mirage. And again, CT spots, pretty much all the old stuff that they want to be playing. You know, Krems and Brolin didn't really have to shift too much. Golden and Flush are taking over B-bomb site. So everything seems to be squaring up there. Overpass, again, they've made some switches, but I feel like it's been for the best. Like, you know, Flush is back playing outside B, which kind of changed up some things for other players. JW actually is still soloing connector, even as a primary opper. Again, they run a lot of 5-rifle setups on the T side, so he's not always using the op very much. In fact, I rarely, like the 2 Overpass games I watched recently, he didn't buy the op but one time in 2 different T-hats where they played pretty much all 15 rounds. You know, and the one time he did buy an op, I think he still went connector, funnily enough, on the stairwell. So playing that a lot. Flush is back outside B, which means you get Krems and Brolin as kind of your hit squad with Golden, which is kind of the same thing you see on mid-control Mirage. And so they seem to, again, just be really comfortable. They can play default really well. They can do, you know, the B, you know, dry hits really quickly or do some set pieces on B. They can definitely mix in the faster pace play, but they have their defaults down. They have their roles well established. And all in all, they look like a good team. I mean, sometimes they can get a little bit loose and scrappy and rely more on explosive play, which can sometimes be a little bit inconsistent, but I've also seen them be able to slow it down and play defaults as well. So it seems like Golden has them operating at a base level pretty well. They're only 3 events deep. This change hasn't been there that long. They haven't been able to get that many reps in. So you feel like it can only improve from here as far as like building more tactics and getting better with the chemistry and getting better with the team play. I think the only thing that could really stop Fnatic is if the individual form starts to trail off, because that was kind of the surprising thing. JW having this crazy resurgence, Flush is somehow, you know, being away for 8 months without looking rusty at all. You know, Brolin really continue to develop as an individual player. I think you can kind of rely on Brolin to keep developing, especially if he's in a proper team where he feels comfortable and he's got, you know, good staffing above him coaching wise, and he has a true in-game leader kind of directing him. You can expect him to continue to develop, I think. But what you could have expected was somehow Flush not to be rusty at all, and then JW just to somehow get back to some kind of crazy monster form. You know, those are the 2 things that I guess you have to kind of wonder if, you know, that's actually going to hold up or not, because that's really going to determine the ceiling of the team. And then I think you have to think about what's going to happen with like Dust 2 and Vertigo in their map pool, because you figure they're going to have to figure out one of them. Maybe they already have figured out Vertigo, we just don't know it yet, because again, they've only played it one time with this lineup. So that's still a mystery to me. Not really sure what to expect from them on Vertigo. Again, their Dust 2 looks really shaky, so that's kind of a problem. So there's some vulnerabilities there in the map pool, and even their, you know, their Inferno isn't like super good win rate. Like, they don't really have a true home map, I guess, is like a point you could make. But they have enough maps that they are capable on to where they can go some different directions and pick ban. They're getting the talent they need. Tactically, they look pretty good. I mean, they're certainly like Noah Strauss as far as like being like a master of defaults and having a crazy deep playbook. But they're functional enough. I mean, they're certainly just as functional tactically as like an Evil Genius is, I think. I think maybe Liquid's still a little bit deeper than them playbook-wise, but again, they're still kind of a fresh team in that regard. I mean, I know it's an old core, but it is still a new lineup. So yeah, that's pretty much all I want to do in this video, just kind of talk about how crazy it is to see Fnatic just kind of come out of nowhere and start getting some big results at tournaments and actually become a top 5 team in the world. You know, considering not that long ago with their previous lineup, they were, you know, falling out in group stages on a pretty consistent basis and were very limited in their success. It's been a really pleasant surprise, the biggest surprise of the year, I think, for my money. And yeah, it'll be curious to see how it continues, because it makes the scene a lot more interesting. So I hope you folks enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.